Good day, grade 12. Your economics teacher for today is SS Dinge, as you see. Then I'll be taking a topic in monopoly. Last week we have done your perfect competition, but now we're proceeding with the imperfect competition. Okay, then let's get into the lesson for today. The dynamics of imperfect competition. Your monopoly is part of the imperfect competition. Okay, let's now look at the imperfect competition as a whole. Imperfect markets are characterized by imperfect competition. It means that as businesses are competing with each other, then the competition itself is imperfect, unlike the other market, which was a perfect market. Then with the imperfect competition, we're having monopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic competition. Okay, then let I then proceed to look at the monopoly as a market structure. A market structure with only one producer and seller of a product or service. It means that there is only one business which is manufacturing this particular product. There is usually no close substitute. That means that there is no product which is similar with the product which is done by the monopoly. Many barriers to entry. It means that it is not easy for other firms and other producers to get into the business, into this particular business. Then this lack of competition results in three harmful things. Firstly, less output is produced than in the competitive environment. There is only this one seller, and then this one seller will decide to produce at a particular level. And then unlike then when there were many sellers, whereby they will be producing many goods as they will be competing with each other. Then the output is sold for more than the market price. We'll remember when we're dealing with the perfect market, then the price was determined by the market, your supply and your demand, your market factors. Those particular instruments, then they were able to determine the market price, but unlike then in the monopoly, then the firm itself decides that this particular product will be sold at this particular price. Production is less efficient and costs more than in a competitive market. Then because there is no competition, and then a question of efficiency will be compromised, because they know even if we are wasting resources, anyway we'll be able to sell our product at a price which we agree upon as the monopoly. Then in that case, then it makes the product itself, the production itself, to be less efficient. Okay, then let's continue with the characteristics of the monopoly. There is no competition. One supplier, one business. Then the products are unique with no close substitutes. As I have already explained this particular product, there is no other product which is similar to this particular product. And then you know that if there was a product which is basically can substitute that particular product, okay, then in that case you will get a situation whereby, okay, then this is what I just want to highlight. Then if then there is a substitute, then one will notice a situation whereby then the sellers will lose in terms of people will simply buy the other product. If this one is expensive, and then people will simply go to the substitute, or will simply buy the substitute product. Therefore, it will make the uniqueness of that particular product not to exist, because there is a particular product which is similar to that one. Okay, then let I then continue with this one. They are still less or still faced with a demand curve. Then we'll remember in the perfect market that there was a demand curve, but the demand curve in that particular case, do we still remember that it was a horizontal one? But in this case, we're going to get a demand curve which is rather slanting down, or then we'll call it, and we'll say it is a falling from the right, from the left to the right. That will be the situation. But then it's the demand curve. They are still faced with the demand curve. Then I'll show you in the next slide what I mean by that. But because they are the only supplier, they can decide where on the demand curve they want to produce. Okay, then I think I'm tempted to just go and show you the demand curve so that you can understand what I mean. This is the demand curve, as I've said that they are faced with the demand curve. Okay, then in this case, then this will be your demand curve. Remember, it's falling from the left to the right. It's a normal demand curve, which means that at higher prices, then the quantity, people will demand less quantity, but then at lower prices, but people then will demand higher quantities. Then this is the normal demand curve. Then monopolies are faced with such a demand curve. Then I can go back to the slide I wanted to explain. Then, as I've done, they are faced with the demand curve. They have considerable control over the price. What do then I mean with that? It means that they know that, okay, consumers, if the quantity is low, then the price, they are willing to buy those particular, they are willing to buy a particular quantity at a given price, and then they can decide, okay, then if I want higher prices, then it means that I have to produce less quantities. But then if then I want to sell more quantities, then it means that my product should be less in terms of the price. They can decide on production level, increasing or decreasing prices accordingly. They increase the price, but they know the quantity should then will decrease. But if they decrease the price, they know the quantity will increase. They are exposed to market forces. Consumers have limited budget. They know that, okay? People whom are selling to have a limited budget. And therefore, then if we want this product to be selling, then it has to be cheaper. Then they're going to look at the market forces, and then they will decide, okay, then what price must we sell our product with so that we can get as much as possible from the consumers. Monopolies must still compete with all other products available in the market. And we have said, basically, they are selling this particular product, which is unique. But this unique product, we must remember, is competing with other products. Consumers will decide whether to buy that product or to buy the other product, because they are these people who are going to decide which product to buy. Therefore, if your product as a monopoly is very expensive, consumers will simply decide that, okay, no, we may not, let's forfeit this particular product and buy the other products. And therefore, in such a case, then it means that monopolies also, they have to think that, but we are still competing with other products in the market. Okay. then they are faced, or they can face substitutes. We've said monopolies have a unique product, but then that unique product, we've said it does not have a close substitute, but it doesn't mean that there are no substitutes at all. There are very few products that have absolutely no substitute. I think I'm clear when I'm saying they don't have a close substitute, but it does not mean that they don't have a substitute at all. E.g., although there is one supply for electricity, you can still use gas for cooking. But then you cannot say gas is the same product as the electricity. But then gas, in this case, is using the same, like you can use gas to do or to cook. You see, you can use electricity to cook, but you can also use gas to cook. You can use a generator, for instance, which is then using petrol or any other form of fuel. Then, in such a case, then they are not necessarily a substitute for electricity. No, they are a close substitute for the electricity, but basically they can substitute the electricity. I think my point is clear. They are likely to exploit the consumers because they are the only supplier of the product. Okay, then because we've already used electricity, then if ESCOM, for instance, is the only supplier as it is the case of the electricity, then it suggests that ESCOM can charge higher prices. Then hence then they talk of exploiting the consumer. Most governments guard against this. Governments will make the point that this one supplier will then not exploit the consumers. They are protected by barriers to entry. That is, government must make the point that, okay, then there is this particular supplier which is of this particular good. Then in order to make the point that this particular supplier survives, then because there are many reasons, like for instance, can you imagine that if ESCOM is not protected by the state, then how much capital will be lost? Remember, in order for the electricity to reach us, then there must be power stations. Can you imagine how much is used to build those power stations? There must be power lines from those power stations in order for them to reach our homes. And then that is capital. And that's a huge amount of capital. But then it necessitates a situation whereby a state must make the point that they protect that capital so that every business can get into that business without being afraid of losing too much. Okay, then the legal restriction. Through those government acts which grant exclusive rights, e.g. post office, as I've said, also with ESCOM, at the moment they are the only suppliers of the electricity. As also post offices, then they were the only suppliers of that particular service. Then government made the point that at least they protect those particular industries. Okay, then also, besides protecting them using the legal system, but then they can use the patents. Patents, what are patents basically? Are legal rights whereby the patent holder obtains an exclusive right to manufacture a product. Then, as a competitor, as a monopolist, then you will not have any other competitors, because in order for any firm to compete with you, they must first earn those particular rights, the patent rights. Otherwise, then they are not able to compete with you. Hence, then we say monopolies are being protected. They can then use patents to protect the monopolies. And also, we can protect monopolies by high start-up or development cost. As I've said, with ESCOM, to build such a system or such a firm, one will need a lot of money, because you have to build power stations, you have to build your electric lines from the power station, which will reach the consumers, and then that will cost a lot of money. And therefore, because of that start-up cost, because of that huge capital which is needed, and then there will be no competitors, then there will be few people who will then be willing to compete with ESCOM. Then licensing. Then the government can issue out licensing that you cannot operate in this particular business unless then you have a license. And in such a case, we can get a situation like, for instance, let's get into TV broadcasting. Then you cannot just decide, okay, now I want to produce or I want to set my own TV station. Then you cannot do that unless you have a license. Then also with the telephones, then you cannot just say, okay, I'm going to open my telephone lines. Then you will need a license to do that. Therefore, other things will need licensing before you can get into that particular business. Those are the things which protects your monopolies. Then, like, another thing will be technical superiority. Then, when a business technical expertise vastly exceeds its competitors, it can dominate that particular industry or that particular market. Like, for instance, they made an example of a Microsoft. And you know, Microsoft, there are few firms which can compete with Microsoft, because Microsoft technically then has expertise in manufacturing computers and basically in getting the best software for the computers. Then there are no other people who are able to build or to have such a complicated software like Microsoft. As a result, now Microsoft is the only industry which is dominating that particular market. I think I'm clear in that. Then I'm getting now closer to a monopoly, how it works and how it functions. Then we're going to discuss the cost and revenue curves. And okay, then before I even start, then we have to note this. Unlike the perfect competitor, the production of the monopolist market makes up the total production for the market. And in the perfect competition, we were having a very huge number of small producers. Then, but in the monopoly market, we have only one producer, then, and is the only one in that particular market. Therefore, we are now shifting from whereby we had many producers, but we have only one producer. And then that particular producer is the only one in that particular market. The monopolist therefore faces a normal market demand curve. one which slopes down from the left to the right as I have explained. Okay, then let's get further to that. Then, as I've already explained, then in this particular graph, then this is our normal demand curve. As you can see, it's D. This D is equal to AR, as I have shown there up there. Then also, let's then look at this particular demand curve. The monopolists can sell at any price quantity combination on the demand curve. Okay, then let I then show those combinations. Okay, then they can sell this quantity at that particular price, or they can sell this quantity at this particular price, or they can sell that particular quantity at that particular price. Okay, then this is basically what they say, but when they say monopolists can sell at any price quantity combination on the demand curve. Therefore, the demand curve is made and is basically showing us the quantity to be sold at a particular price. Okay, then okay, I've removed everything. Then let I then move to the second point. The monopolist demand curve is also the average revenue, that is equal to the AR curve. Okay, then I need to explain that. Okay, then the AR, this is your average revenue. To get your average revenue, okay, I think I just need to do this. You know that your AR basically it's equal to your price times quantity, then divide by the quantity. Then that is your average revenue. Okay, then they say the monopolist demand curve is also the AR, that is, it's your price times quantity divided by the quantity. Okay, then I can then show you this. Let's say this is the price. Okay, then I just want to put figures. Then at that particular price, then the quantity, let's say we say the quantity there is 10. Then 100 divided by 10, it will give you a price which is your price. It's, let's assume that our price there is 10. 10 is equal to quantity. It's okay. Quantity is going to be 100 times 10, the quantity there, and divided by, yeah, I've said the price there is 100. 100 times 10 divided by 10, which it leaves us with what? With the your average revenue. I've said it's equal to 100 times 10 divided by 10. Then 10 divided by 10 goes there once, and then you are left with 100. Therefore, you are left with 100. Therefore, it is equal to your price. Then they said there, because I want to explain. Because the price is equal to average revenue. If 100 is equal to 10, 100 times 10 over 10, so 100 is equal to 100. because that's then the point. Price is equal to average revenue. Then, but I think Semkile mfana? Benifuna ubuya umva nje kwesi slide. Yes. But lana kanqa lapha lo i-recording itself. The monopolist can sell at any price quantity combination on the demand curve. Okay, then there is a demand curve, price, quantity, they can sell at any price quantity combination. Then the monopolist demand curve is also the average revenue curve. The demand curve is also equal to the AR that we have discussed already when we're dealing with the perfect market. As a result of the downward sloping curve, the marginal revenue, that is MR, is always lower than the AR. You see, there is your AR, but then the MR always falls below the AR. This means that MR curve will always be below the AR curve. Your MR will always be below this. Okay, then if you just want to understand what is said, then one you can understand it this way: your marginal revenue is the revenue of the last item. As you can see, as the quantity increases, the price decreases. Therefore, it suggests that the last items are cheaper. Then I think that will make you to understand. Okay, then the price quantity combination in the demand curve is also its average revenue curve. Then you have your price quantity, then that relation, they say the price quantity combination, those combination in the demand curve, it's always the average revenue. Then there is your average revenue, which is obviously on the demand curve. Then the AR from each product is calculated by dividing the total revenue by quantity. That is, you are dividing basically your total revenue. It's price times quantity. You divide that by the quantity, cancel the other quantity, and then you are left with price. Therefore, this is equal to price. Okay, then we get into the other point. The MR always cuts the horizontal axis halfway between origin and the point of intersection of demand curve, AR. Then what do they mean here? They say this is your horizontal axis. Those are the horizontal axis. And then this point is halfway between D and the point of origin. Then that's where, then when you draw your AR, you have to, your MR, you have to remember that your MR will cut those horizontal axes halfway. Monopolists try to fix the price above the center of the demand curve in order to increase revenue. This is the center of the demand curve. That is the center. Then the price, what is said that the monopolist are going to decide on a price on this side that is above the that point that is above the center. Okay, then there it is. Then that is your center. At the center, you notice that your demand, you are having a unitary or a unit elastic demand. Then it's unitary. That means that it change in price, change in quantity in terms of the magnitude. But then when it gets into this side, then you notice that particular side it's elastic, and then this other side it's inelastic. Then the monopolist will say, okay, then we are going to use this particular side with the elastic demand. Then can we just read what is said so that we can understand what I was explaining? The monopolist is a price maker. Then they decide on the price. The level of output is determined by the demand for the goods. Then if the demand is high, and then the monopolist will produce more, or services that the monopolist provides, then whether it's goods or services. In the case of monopolists, the demand curve is the firm's average revenue curve. Okay, then the demand curve, then with the monopolists, they said, okay, then we're going to use that particular curve, that demand curve, as our curve as monopolists. Then hence they said, in the case of monopolists, the demand curve is the firm's average revenue curve. They use that, then it becomes their AR. Total revenue is calculated using the following formula. Your total revenue is price times quantity. That is your total revenue. In this case, then you have your P times Q, price times quantity. That means P1 times Q1. P1 can stand for any price, can be 10 or can be 20, whatever, and then the quantity also can be at any level. Can be 10, can be 20, can be any level. In this, okay, please note that the elasticity of the demand curve for the monopolist changes depending upon the price at which the goods are sold. Okay, then if the price is high, we can see now the demand becomes elastic. But then if it is low, then it becomes inelastic. This is what is being said there. Okay, then now we are able to draw now our curves for the monopoly. We've already discussed D is equal to AR in the previous slides, and then there is your MR, which should be cutting that particular horizontal axis halfway. Then that is the case. Then now we have to introduce now the AC and the MC. That is your average cost and your marginal cost. Okay, then from the previous lesson, when we're discussing the perfect competition, we always know that MC cuts AC on its minimum point. Okay, then it suggests that MC, there is MC, and then is your AC. Then we assume that that particular point is our minimum. But then we have already also learned that when MC cuts your MR, that is when now we get the quantity whereby we are maximizing the profits. Okay, then can we see there is our MC. It cuts our MR just like in the a perfect market. And then that's where we maximize the profits. Okay, then this is our point E, as you can see. But then, as said earlier on, the monopolies are using the AR to determine the price. Okay, then there it is. You then proceed and until you reach your AR. Then you reach your AR at point A. And in that case, then it tells us exactly that price P1. Then it means that, as we can see, that is a demand curve. Consumers are saying, we can purchase this quantity at that particular price at P1. Monopolies have no problem with that. Okay, then they will then say, okay, then we can also sell that quantity at that particular price, P1. Then that will be the total revenue, P times Q. That will give you total revenue. But then we need to check whether the monopolies at that particular price, are they making a profit? Are they making a loss? If it's a profit, is it economic profit or is it a normal profit? Then we need to determine the cost. Then we'll remember that the cost, when this line, your line, whereby we're determining the, where we're maximizing our profits, that Q, then we notice that we extended that line to A. But in the process, that line is cutting AC. When that line cuts your AC, then that is where we derive our cost. As you can see, we are cutting that AC at point B. And then at point B, and then it corresponds with the cost. Therefore, it means that our costs are below P. Then the revenue, as you can see, P times Q, that is your total revenue, it's more than the cost, because your cost will be this portion, which is cost times the quantity. That will give you the overall cost. And therefore, as you can see, now the costs are below the revenue. The blue portion represents your economic profit. But I illustrated this on this particular side, that the monopolies, the total revenue is Q1 times P1. And the total cost, basically, it's that Q1 times AC, which is your point B, which corresponds to the point B from the graph. Therefore, your total revenue basically is greater than your total cost. Therefore, it means that we are making an economic profit. Okay, then I think we can then pass this particular slide. As we have noticed that profit is maximized by expanding this particular line, production line, up to a point where the marginal costs are equal to our marginal revenue, which is our point A. Then the price at which the product will be sold will be that particular price, which is P1. The cost will be determined by this particular point where this line cuts your AC, and then it will give you your cost. I think now you know how to determine your cost. And then, but then let's have some calculations. Okay, then at this particular, with this particular graph, your price was given now a value. The price is 90 and the quantity is 100. And then you remember that your total revenue, we've said it's P times Q. which therefore means it's 90 times 100, which is P times Q. Then minus your total cost. Your total cost now it's 70 times 100. Minus 70 times 100. I'm going to have 900 less 700, which will then give me 200. Then that 200 will be then your economic profit. If then we are given a figures, then you can calculate it in that particular way. Then, but also monopolies can do or can make losses, although they are price makers. But it happens that they can make a loss. Okay, loss is maximized by, is minimized by expanding production line up to a point where marginal costs are equal to your marginal revenue. Your marginal cost, marginal revenue, we've got that in point E. Then, at this point, quantity that should be produced to minimize the cost is Q1. And then it gives us the quantity. And then in that particular quantity, but now we have said in the previous slide that the monopolist will use the AR, the demand curve, to determine the price. Then they will extend that line until it reaches point A, which falls on the average revenue. And then that gives you P1. And then that is the price. But that particular price, as you can see, it'll cost Z to are more than the price. How do we determine cost? Then we have to extend this line until it reaches AC. Then it reaches AC at point B. And then we get the corresponding cost will be at point C, which then falls above P. And therefore it means that now it costs are more than the price. And therefore the blue portion, that is P1, A, B, and C, that rectangle basically represents your cost. The cost will be determined at point B where production line touches AC. I've just explained that. And therefore your economic loss then it can be calculated as we have done previously. Then Q1 times P1, and then that will be your total revenue. Unfortunately, it's less than the total cost, where is Q1 times C. And then that is the whole area QBCO. And then, but that whole area, it's more than this area for your revenue. Therefore, total costs are more than your total revenues. Then that means that now the monopolies are operating at a loss. I've used the term minimize cost, but then when I was referring to the profits, I've used the term maximize profits, and therefore it means that if firms want to maximize the profits, and then also they minimize the cost. Okay, I think you have noted that. Okay, then short-term losses. Economic loss can only be for a short time, as monopolies, as price setters will soon raise the price to cover the losses. When they see that now we're operating at a loss, then they will reset their prices, and then they will make the point that they set a price whereby it covers the losses. And then, because they are price setters anyway, then they will solve that particular problem. In a short term, monopolies can have an economic loss, but that will be solved by monopolies by setting a new price which will be above the cost. Okay, then we get into the next slide. Our next slide is the normal profit. Profit is maximized by expanding production line up to a point where MC is equal to MR. As we can see now, we all know these particular graphs, and then we know that when MC cuts your MR, we get the quantity, and then we are maximizing the profits, and then we'll check, okay, at what price must we then sell that particular product, and then, okay, then we move to the demand curve or your average revenue curve, and then we reach point A, because that is where we are touching your average revenue curve or your demand curve. But at that point, we are also touching now our AC. As you can see, that AC is tangent to that particular line, which is your D. And then at that particular point, then I'm touching both curves, my AR and my AC. And therefore, in that case, there is no, I've already touched my AC. And therefore, it means that at this point, my price is also equal to the cost. Then, it means, therefore, I'm making a normal profit. That is a normal profit. And because now at that particular point, my costs are equal to the total revenue. Total cost is equal to the total revenue, as I have explained here. Total revenue is Q1 times P1, and also my total cost. My total cost, you can see that it's Q1 times C, and C is equal to P, and therefore it means that total revenue is equal to my total cost. As you can see that total cost is equal to total revenue. This means that Monopolies has made a normal profit. Okay, then this was explaining that. Okay, then now when we look at the monopolies and the perfect market, then we'll discover these particular points. And before I get into that, unlike the perfect market situation, remember we said in that case, in the perfect market, in the long run, we are only making, we are bound to make the normal profits. But that is not the case with the monopolies. Monopolies, they can make the economic profits even in the long run. Then it was explained in the perfect market in this particular way. Then you remember that when firms are making economic profits, then that will attract other firms to get into the market. And then as more firms get into the market, unfortunately, the product, the quantity of the product will be increased. And when the quantity increases, unfortunately, and then the price will then be lessened, because now the new firms which get into the market will make the supply to shift, and then as supply shifts, then it unfortunately makes the price to be lowered. As you remember, that has been discussed in the perfect market situation. But then with the monopolies, one will remember that now there are no other firms which can get into this particular firm because into this particular industry, because we've said there are some protections in the form of patent rights, in the form of legal requirements, in the form of huge capital which is needed, and all such things, in the form of licenses. You remember we've discussed that earlier on. Therefore, they make it impossible for other firms to get into the market, and therefore monopolies can enjoy their economic profits even in the long run. This is what I wanted to explain. But then we can then look at the table, which then says that in monopolies, downward sloping demand curve, but then in the perfect market, the demand curve was horizontal. Then with the MR in the monopolies, it lies below the demand curve, but the MR curve is the same as the demand curve when it comes to the when it comes to the perfect market. But then those monopolies are price setters, but then in perfect market were price takers. They are just taking the price from the market. Individual business is the industry. That is the only firm. But then with the perfect market, you notice that there are many sellers, many firms. Individual businesses are many, lot of them. But there is only one seller basically. Then products is differentiated on the other side, but on this side, with the perfect market, the product is homogeneous. It looks the same. Then, when it comes to the monopolies, as I've just explained, that it can make economic profit, can enjoy economic profits even in the long run. But with the perfect market, that is impossible, because new entrants will get into the market, making the supply curve to shift, and then that unfortunately makes the market price also to go down.